news, everyone.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
I see dead people.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
And knowing is half the battle.
What, the deuce?
Must have the precious.
And I'll form the head.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take it away.
What you talking about, Willie?
Wow, infotainment.
Welcome to this extra special episode of Transmissions Extra, where we are, so far it's just me. It's just Snazzy Mike over here. But I am joined by someone super, super special. For those of you who love Empire of Rust, you might recognize him as the voice of Leatherback, of Immigration Guard Number 1, and the upcoming Waveform.
Or Lamplighter.
Or Lamplighter. That too, yeah. That's Lamplighter.
Lord Scourge. Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon Oullette. I'm a friend of Snazzy Mike's and have had the distinct pleasure of being able to voice some of the NPCs and other characters on Empire of Rust. And super happy to be on the podcast to talk about Transformers stuff.
Awesome. And it's great that you actually happened upon us today because Brandon, I just got a comment on the Empire of Rust channel over here on the Transmissions Discord, and they are talking about your voice performance and how good it is. So,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Was this for the new one with Lamplighter?
Yep.
Oh, nice.
No, I'm sorry, not Lamplighter. This is episode 101 that just came out this week.
Oh, nice. That's so nice. Which, pardon me, my dog is barking in the background.
Which, now that you mention it, actually, I think is Lamplighter. So, yeah, all right, cool.
Yeah, I think the newest one was Lamplighter, but that's awesome. Well, I'm glad people are enjoying that stuff. It's super fun.
So, yeah, as Brandon mentioned, we are going to be talking about the Transformers RPG today. Not Empire of Rust, which admittedly is still the greatest Transformers RPG podcast out there. But we're going to be talking about the Renegade Games Transformers RPG that was released last year in 2022. So we thought that we'd get together and talk about some character creation stuff and how to build characters in this new system and just kind of give you a very basic overview of the system itself.
Yeah, I think it's a great place to start when it comes to a new RPG. I think a lot of people get excited about character creation. I think when we are looking at RPGs, new or old, I think most of our first thought comes down to character creation because we have all these ideas for cool and fun characters, and they are the primary vessel for either players, but it's also an important thing for game masters to consider because how characters run changes how you run your adventures or missions, I think would be the term better used for Transformers. And Michael and I were able to get together and I ran a brief adventure based it was basically the adventure in the back of the core rulebook for the new Transformers RPG by Renegade Studios. Made some adjustments to it myself, as game masters are wont to do. But sat down and made the characters for the group and then handed them out to everybody so we could just play. And I think I learned a lot about it. And I was talking to Mike about it. And so we thought we would share our thoughts and opinions about it here, as well as just sort of walk through the character creation steps.
Troubled Waters was the adventure in the back of the book there. It's a very short 3-part little mini adventure, and Renegade has already put out several other things that are going to be run for Transformers. They released the Beacon of Hope, a standalone adventure. I think it's like a 60-70 page book, and The Time Is Now just released. The Time Is Now, get it? Just now. That actually just released, and I just got my copy in yesterday. And this one is a full hardcover, something like a 200, 300-page book that is effectively 6 adventures, like 6 3-part adventures that you can run your characters through. So that's a very exciting thing to get.
Yeah, and I believe, I don't remember which one it is, but I believe Renegade also released a bunch of pre-generated characters so that if you're maybe uncertain about making a character and you want to see how the system runs at first, you can play like a level 1 version of like Bumblebee and RC and maybe Wheeljack. I don't remember exactly who was in there, but they released some pre-generated characters for people to run with that first adventure that they released after the core rulebook.
That is awesome. Did you grab any of that stuff for the adventure that you were writing up?
No, I think that by the time that came out or that I saw it was out, I had already sat down and done all of the characters.
Nice.
And so that was already done and it was fun. I as someone who, I mean, I've been running D&D for well over a decade now. God, almost 2 decades. Gosh, I'm old. And so I'm super into like mechanics and how the mechanical end of RPGs interact with the storytelling and like character concept and fantasy and how that sort of gets implemented. And I'm always interested in trying out new systems. And so as a big fan of Transformers and seeing a new system, I was super excited to try it out. And I think we learned a lot. Both, the adventure went pretty smoothly. Some, hiccups here and there as learning a new system and running it is wont to do.
Totally true.
Yeah. But I think if we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this sort of conversation, I think the thing that I realized, and I'm glad that I did it this way, because I think traditionally, when we make characters for RPGs, we typically have an idea in our head already of who we want our character to be. And they're sort of an island unto themselves. Like, if I'm going to sit down and make a character for, like, 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, like, I might already have an idea for my sort of, like, half-orc barbarian, and they're going to do this. I'm going to plan for this specialization. I want to use this kind of weapon. This is going to be my, basic, like, character, like, archetype and concept. And then we'll sort of sit down as a group and, figure out how they're going to all interact together. Some people choose to sit down and build their characters as a group. And I think that with this system, I think that it's best to do character creation with the group. The system seems super team focused where everyone is going to have skills and also deficiencies, where because of the way systems with like you're having skills and if you don't, you roll with a snag, it means that the things that you aren't good in, you're really bad in, and you're going to need your friends to sort of supplement that with their skills.
Did we talk about what a snag is already?
Oh, we didn't. So in this game, there are, instead of, for anyone who's familiar with other systems like 5th edition D&D, I will probably reference that the most often during this episode just because it seems to be the most, common TTRPG experience for a lot of people these days, which makes sense. It's a huge game. So that will probably be like sort of like the common level conversation in terms of terminology I'll be comparing to. So instead of advantage or disadvantage, like in 5th edition D&D, the Renegade Transformers game uses edge and snag. And just like with advantage and disadvantage, if you roll with an edge, you roll 2d20s and you get to take the higher result. If you roll the snag, you roll 2d20s and take the lower result. And in this game, if you are, let's say, trying to sneak past some Decepticons and making an infiltration test, if you have no ranks in infiltration, which would sort of be like having a bonus, like a skill bonus in D&D, whereas in D&D, your base like stat, if it was like dexterity, applies to that bonus. That doesn't happen in Transformers. You take ranks as those skill abilities increase in various skills, and if you don't have it, by default you roll the snag. So it's very much a game that seems to focus on characters being specialists rather than generalists, and you can sort of spread out a little bit. I think there are some character builds that you could do that is trying to be a bit of a jack of all trades. But I would say my general thought process when I was looking at this is like the team needs to be able to work together and have strengths and weaknesses. And they should probably know what everyone's strengths and weaknesses are, because if too many people's skill ranks overlap, there will be huge gaps in like what the team can do as a group. That's sort of my observation.
And something to add to that, when comparing Transformers to other D20 systems like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or Starfinder, there's in these classic systems, there's generally six major attributes, six major abilities that you're going to have. Whereas in Transformers, actually in everything that Renegade has built with the Essence 20 system, it has been stripped down to four key abilities that drive all of the skills and all of the things that you can do.
As well as your defenses. Yeah, it's really been boiled down. And so you have a lot of things that we generally consider as being separate in other systems, like the idea of a character's raw strength and power versus their physical toughness is usually divided into like strength and constitution. In this game, they're all just in your strength because there are skills like athletics and strength, as well as conditioning, which is basically how you increase your health. And it's sort of what represents your physical hardiness.
Your toughness.
Your toughness. Speed basically comes. Okay, so I guess we should probably talk about what these core abilities are, also called essences in this system. Instead of having like the 6 core ability scores that you would have in something like D&D, you have your 4 essences, or the 4 S's: strength, speed, smarts, and social. Strength is your physical toughness. In fact, that's the name of the defense that applies to it. Speed is like your nimbleness, as well as like how many actions you can actually take in a turn is determined by your speed. So it's very important. Determines, your initiative, how well you can use like things like ranged weapons, even your driving skill. If you're trying to do some crazy stunt in vehicle mode, that'll be determined by your speed. And then we have smarts, which is a little bit of combination of intelligence and wisdom in other systems, because not only is it going to apply to things like the science skill, which is very much like a knowledge skill and technology, but will also apply to things that we generally associate with a wisdom stat in other systems, such as survival or alertness, which kind of translates to perception. So if you want to be a very perceptive character, I think of characters, if you want to be like a scout or an analyst like Bumblebee or Hound, you would want to really increase your smarts. It's not just for scientists like Wheeljack and for Ratchet, it's for other characters as well. And then there's the social stat, which is, it's mostly like your charisma stat. It sort of works very similarly to that. But it also has stuff like animal handling and streetwise, which are sort of more niche skills.
Things like diplomacy, bluff, intimidation.
Exactly.
Trying to force your presence into the battlefield or into the role-playing situations.
Yeah. So it's important to sort of think about what you want your character to be in these various situations. Like I think of, there is certain classes that make good use. I say classes, they're called roles in this game, and we'll get into those later. But some of them make great use of the social essence. The Scout, I believe, is one of them, where they get extra bonuses and can take on certain specializations even when they gain bonuses to their social. With Bumblebee being a big example, I would think of, he's sort of like one of the primary characters I think of when I think of Transformers with a high social stat, just due to how he interacts with humans, and he's able to make friends with many of them in his various incarnations across Transformers series.
You could also make the case that someone like Mirage or Sunstreaker, characters who are very vain and very, very, very much, look at me, look at how cool I am, look how important I am. Characters
Absolutely.
like that would certainly have a high social score.
Yeah. I totally agree. So those are the essences, and each one is associated with various skills. For one example, strength has athletics, brawn, conditioning, intimidation, and might. And basically what will happen is that as your characters level up, and more importantly for this episode, when you're making your character, every time you increase one of these essence scores, you get to take a rank in one of these associated skills. And that increases the die that you roll with the D20 when you're making a test for one of those things. Instead of having a flat bonus to a skill roll that you make in this game, like you would in D&D, you roll an additional die, which is determined by the number of ranks in a skill. Of the characters that I made, using strength as our continued example, I made the war veteran gunner, Wallop. He had 8 points into strength, and I put 3 ranks into his brawn essence. What that means is that any time he had to make a brawn skill, which would be something like hold on. I actually am going to look it up in the book because between athletics, brawn, and might, these are all very similar sounding words, but they actually have distinct meanings.
If I remember right, brawn was your just physical power, being able to lift stuff above your head. Athletics was feats of not just movement, but like being able to swim or climb. And might, I believe, was your physical power when like punching or swinging swords, axes, hammers, and what have you.
So let's say, if Wallop wanted to force a blast door that had been closed and he wanted to force it open, he would make a brawn test. And since he has 3 ranks, first rank gives you a D2, which is either a D2 die, a coin, or you roll a D4 and subtract it by half. Second rank gives you a full D4, and a third rank gives you a D6. So I would roll a D20 and a D6, add them together, and that would be my test result. Each of these has those, and then you can specialize, which is not specifically defined in the system. They give suggested specializations for each of these skills. And basically what happens is if you can apply that specialization to a skill roll, you get to roll all the dice within that skill. So let's say I'm trying to think of one. It
was pretty badass too, because I believe I was specialized in I forget what it was, but there was something I was specialized in, and I had like a D8 in that particular skill, and I ended up rolling a D2, a D4, a D6, and a D8.
Yeah, which is pretty awesome. And you get to take the highest of all of those, which is super fun. And I think one of the main reasons why I think this system what the designers are going for is to become a specialist, because it's fun to roll this big pool of dice and pick out the highest numbers to get this high roll. So I think they want you to specialize in things, which means taking more ranks within a single skill and not spreading yourself out too thin. So that's a basic overview. I don't want us to get too much into the weeds for like the broader mechanics, because we are here to talk about character creation. But I figured we'd take some time to sort of define some of our terms. And if more things come up, we can define them as we go along.
Any character that you've come across within Transformers lore has an equivalent, or has a character, has a role, has an origin, and has an influence that you can use to help recreate or to kind of inform your own character. So if you saw something that's in any of the Transformers media that you thought was really, really neat and you really wanted to be able to do that, odds are you can do that, and you can have your character as part of that. Now, I will say that one thing that the system does kind of assume a little bit here is that you are playing Autobots, because the entire system is based on it is based on the cartoon, not specifically like the G1 cartoon, but it's based off of the kind of like adventure of the week kind of session, kind of ideal behind your gameplay.
Yeah, it sort of does take place. There's like some flavor text in there with like Bumblebee, there's like a section that talks about locations in the back of the core book. And Bumblebee will reference various events and adventures that happened in the G1 cartoon, which is really interesting to me. But it sort of, I think, is a suggestion that it's sort of like similar to the G1 cartoon insofar as it presents concept like the Autobots are based in the Ark. And that the Decepticons have an underwater base at the bottom of the ocean, and these sorts of various things. But I would say that, the system does sort of assume that you're playing Autobots. But in terms of like the exact nature of that sort of G1 tapestry that they sort of set up, I think there's a lot of room for game masters to sort of play with that. Whether it's sort of like it's G1, but sort of like an alternate timeline kind of G1, or, that sort of thing. Adding in
like Beast Formers, kind of like the Beast Wars era characters, is a little bit of a challenge in this system at the moment. Renegade is going to they said they're going to be releasing additional books later on that will add those kind of options to it, to the system, but they haven't quite materialized just yet. So as of right now, it is very much focused on kind of a G1 feel, like cars, trucks, vehicles kind of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely vehicle focused. And I feel like anytime I brought up this system to anyone, and I feel like even when you and I were talking about it for the first time, one of the first questions people ask is, can I have a beast mode? I mean, it makes sense. Beast Wars is beloved, and with the new movie coming out, Rise of the Beast, I think it's on everyone's mind.
Yeah.
I think right now, if someone is really hell-bent on it, the best thing you can probably do as a game master and as the players to work together to figure out a way to reskin a vehicle into a beast mode. Like the first thing I think of is like, if you want to be like a bird, like a giant eagle or something like that, you take like the Seeker, which is like your jet alt mode, and you reskin its abilities and sort of make it a bird of some kind. Downside being is that it's going to be harder for you to disguise yourself if you're a bird the size of a fighter jet. Your alt mode is not going to be as easy to hide in urban areas amongst humans if you're, a mechanical animal, or if you have like a biological exterior like the Maximals in the original Beast Wars cartoon. You're also going to be smaller than your fellow Autobots, who are going to be much larger. So yeah, I would say for those of you who are interested in this game but want to do beast modes, you can, but we might suggest waiting until Renegade releases the proper supplement for it, and feel free to learn the system with the assumptions that they have in mind. But if you're really hell-bent on it, you can do it. The sky's the limit when it comes to TTRPGs, as they offer a framework. But if you want to do the work to build your own stuff for it, go for it.
All right. Well, without any further ado, let's actually jump into how to create a character in the system. As you mentioned before, there are three kind of big things here. There's roles, there's origins, and there's influences. So why don't you go ahead and start us off with some influences? What are they?
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of these things sort of sound similar to other systems, but their terms might be different than you might initially assume. So when we're generally looking at character creation in other RPGs, there's generally some sort of way to choose like what your character was before they became an adventurer, a hero, or in this case, a heroic Autobot. Some systems call that backgrounds. Some might call them origins, but those are referred to something else in this game. In the Renegade system, those are called influences. These are basically, I like to think of them as what your character's role was or occupation was on Cybertron before the war. Or you can make it that like their position during the Great War is part of this. These provide small benefits. Things, they all provide a perk that you can pick from. One of them, if you want it to be a former senator from like Cybertron, perk would be you get to choose a deception or persuasion specialization. That could be something like bluff. And then whether or not you invested into that specialization, you gain an edge or advantage on skill tests when that specialization comes into play. So each of them have their own sort of perk like this. And then they have potential hangups and suggested characteristics. I see these as mostly flavor. I would say that if you're more of like a mechanics mind player, you can sort of look for things that can really optimize what you want to do. The one I think of off the top of my head is the drive or the racer influence, which is great for if you're any sort of vehicle, you can very easily give yourself quite a big bonus on tests to do anything driving related in your alt mode by investing into the racer influence. But I see these most as cool flavor things to think about, like how it adds to your character's personality. Michael, have you spent some time looking through these influences and sort of getting a feel for what they sort of offer players?
Yeah, certainly. And one of the really big things that I like about this is that each influence has a table of what's called bonds. And these are not anything mechanical. Like these are, mechanical Transformers.
Nice.
These aren't any.
I feel like it's going to happen a lot.
I think so. These aren't these don't provide any mechanical advantages or disadvantages, but what they are is just a nice little random way of determining what how your character is going to look at life and how they're going to perceive the world. So, for example, the inventor influence has a whole bunch of bonds. Like one of them is human biology fascinates me. Another one is another is I once invented technology that ended up in the Decepticons' hands. These are
what a cool way, that's such a great seed for character motivations and personality.
Exactly right. All of this stuff right here is just pure catnip for the games master to sprinkle in some adventure hooks and some story plots that specifically focus on your character and allows a very easy way to have your character shine.
Yeah, I sort of see these very similar to the ideals, bonds, and flaws of 5th edition D&D, which I think a lot of people have sort of discarded. I think they have an idea for their character, and so they don't really use those. But I'm of the opinion that when you're making your character and first started playing, that's when you know your character the least well. And that you're often not going to know how your character is going to react to things or what their opinions are on stuff. And so these sorts of bonds, I feel are a great way, as a reference point, as a nice starting place. And obviously all these things can change, right? I think the best characters during your time playing an RPG are those that are different at the end of that campaign from where they start. So, I think that no one should look at these as being restrictive, that my character has to now follow this description of their personality. But as a place, if you're ever sitting down and playing, what would my character do? You sit down and you reference that. And it can be a great place to start from, be full of inspiration. Like Michael said, referencing some of these inventor bonds. There's so many cool ideas for what your character cares about or what they don't care about. Maybe they don't care about humans, and that could be a very interesting point of conflict.
Very true. And one last part to influences is what are called hang-ups. And I know you mentioned these before a bit there, Brandon. These are effectively the reverse of perks. And a perk is just a little benefit that you get from whatever class feature or role feature that you have. But what the hang-up is it's a negative that is a really good way to help define your character in terms of quirks, personality quirks, personality hang-ups, things that they're doing that might not be as efficient or as effective, but will provide some life and some personality to the characters. So, for example, you have a hang-up called Earth Spoiled. Earth Spoiled means that you really love all of Earth culture, and to the point where you might get distracted during battle if you see some really amazing or interesting piece of Earth art, of Earth culture.
Think of Beachcomber or Hound.
Right, exactly. I wasn't able to make it come into play too much on the character that you made for me, Brandon. But as I was kind of driving through the canyons of I think it was Utah we were passing through.
It might have been Nevada. I think.
Nevada, right. I tried to kind of have my character, his name is the Showboat, distracted by some of the just the beauty of Earth.
Yeah. No, and I think characters with flaws can be really fun. These do have a bit more of a mechanical implication than other systems where it's more for flavor. And I'll also mention that when you're making your character, you actually don't have to take the hangups associated with these influences unless you take more than one. If I remember correctly, when you're making your character, you can choose up to 3 influences, which can make for a really interesting combination when you're building a character. If you think about just having one, that makes, something pretty clear cut. I would say, I'm trying to think of a character that would just have one. I guess maybe Prowl. You could sort of think of him as being having the security influence, and that's pretty much it. However, I would say for something like Optimus Prime, you could potentially have 2 influences in the, not just the war veteran, but maybe something like the bureaucrat from his time as a clerk in the Hall of Records as Orion Pax, which also would give him some social benefits. So there's some interesting combinations you can do with these. But if you do choose more than one, I think you can choose up to 3.
That's
It's right here in the book. You can choose up to 3. For each one after the first, you have to select a hang-up associated with those additional influences. And they will have a list of them that are associated with each one, which can be really fun. I will say that some of them feel a little cumbersome for the GM to implement at every potential encounter.
Right.
There's one like impulsive. It says in the book, you are reckless and rash, taking that shot at the lead Decepticon when your mission is only supposed to be reconnaissance. No matter the circumstances, you never gain the benefits of surprise. Additionally, you take 1 downshift, we'll talk about downshifts, on your first skill test after you roll initiative. Now, I understand sort of like the idea behind this, the idea that your character is so gung-ho to run into battle that they sort of like, as the group might be like sneaking up on some Decepticons, that your character just so is like, hey, Deceptic creeps, and like takes out their gun and like declares themselves before the battle begins. It kind of sucks to never gain the benefits of surprise. So what I would say, as someone who ran this, I've only ran, also, caveat to all of this, while we are both experienced TTRPG players and GMs and big Transformers fans, we have only run 2 sessions of this. So take this with a grain of salt. The system is still new. And we invite you guys all to, come to your own conclusions. Comment down below your experiences with the game, if you have any. On whatever platform you listen to this on, if it has places for comments, we'd love to hear your opinions on some of these things. My opinion for some of these hangups for GMs is to use these hangups in more impactful situations. Like I would say impulsive could be really great to use if the Autobots are outnumbering like their Decepticons. Like let's say they've come upon 2 Decepticons who are sort of on patrol and there's 5 Autobots. I would say impulsive definitely would apply because that character who's impulsive is definitely going to be feeling themselves and want to jump out. If they see, like, if that character doesn't necessarily have a reason to want to get Megatron right away, if they see Megatron and they're level 1, I'm not going to make them, like eliminate surprise for potentially the whole rest of the group. There are other ones that I think are similar to that, where you might want to opt to not implement a hang-up in all situations. But I think in situations where it can be done, it can be a really interesting way to sort of mechanically reinforce a character flaw.
Absolutely. So yeah, influences, really, really good ways of getting your character's kind of story told, your character's like backstory into the campaign, and just really allows you to kind of get that story creation from your character into the overall story and kind of integrated into the story. Let's go ahead and move on to Origins. Now, Origins is kind of like you expect. It is the alt mode of your character. This is kind of equivalent to like races in other gaming systems, and it's effectively just kind of like the physicality of who you are, of what your body is and what it can do. So just like other gaming systems, the Origins adds, unlike other gaming systems, the Origin adds quite a bit to Transformers because it's not just a couple of small flat bonuses. It does help to define what your character is actually going to be capable of and what they're going to be able to do.
Yeah, things like movement speed and various other abilities. It's a very impactful choice.
For example, like if you wanted to be a jet, you're likely going to choose the Seeker Origin, which is going to provide you with a fly speed to your alt mode and allows you to just kind of like zoom around the battlefield. Now, one thing that they did that was really, really good was Renegade didn't give you a list of vehicles that you could choose from. It allows you to just pick the Origin as a type of vehicle, kind of a flavor of vehicle. So again, like the Seeker is going to be a jet. The Champion is going to be a car or like a race car of some kind. You have other things like the Monolith, which are just like big old giant trucks. but it doesn't define what you have to look like. So if you want to be a seeker is going to give you a fly speed. So you could be a jet. You could be a helicopter. You could be a prop plane. You could be a hang glider if you're into that.
Yeah, I think they do a good job of sort of leaving it open. They give a bunch of examples as well in the description of these. But yeah, defining the nature of your alt mode in the system, I love how open it is. I think that generally most people will sort of like fall into sort of similar things, but I think that the fact that it's so open is really great. I think of things like the Lookout origin, which, you know, you could be a small car, or you could be something that doesn't move. Like, I think that if you were to categorize a character like Soundwave, his alt mode would be Lookout, which can either be like a small vehicle or a like an object potentially that doesn't have like a movement speed itself. You'll gain like a 20-foot little aerial speed, so you can sort of like hover or something like that. But there's so much like flexibility in there.
Hover on the sound waves.
Yeah. But yeah, and so like what's great is that they have some examples in here to briefly just sort of going over the various origins. We have the Champion, which are sort of like fast cars is generally. It's like other than the Seeker, which is like your flying jet, it has the fastest mobility, and it gives examples of like Blur, Jazz, and Sunstreaker as Autobots with a chassis that we would categorize as Sunstreaker. There's the Cutter, which is like your aquatic vehicles. Boats. Think of characters like Broadside, Sea Watch, Sea Spray, Depth Charge. That's a more niche one. And I think that you definitely want to like work with your GM to make sure that there will be plenty of opportunities to go into water. Right. Our adventure took place in Nevada, not famously known for its water, but there was a dam with like a reservoir, so there was some water to move through. The Lookout, like we mentioned, is like a smaller vehicle. Whether you want to be like a motorcycle or a small, like if I would say like Bumblebee as a Volkswagen Bug would count as a Lookout. I sort of see it as your catch-all for more generic or like standard vehicles that don't fall into any of the other categories. I think Lookout is a good qualifier for that.
Good way of putting it, yeah.
Yeah, like if you just want to be like Impreza, there's like, or like some, you know, if you just want to be a Kia Rio, I don't know, like some like nondescript car like that, then those are vehicles that I think the Lookout could potentially be really good for. Where everything else, like the Champion is generally a fast car, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like a flashy car. So you could use that as well. Let's see. After that, we've got the Monolith, like Michael mentioned. These are like your big vehicles. These are like big 18-wheelers or like big trucks, something heavy duty.
Fire engine, stuff like that. It's things that are just heavy, but not necessarily combat focused.
Yes. That would be something like the Rainmaker, which is built for war. Usually, likely like a heavy military vehicle. But it does mention that you could something less obtrusive, like a sort of like a combat Jeep or something with like armaments on it. Generally, the idea is that the Rainmaker is a military vehicle that has guns on it. There's the Outrider, which is sort of like, I would say like Hound would be a good example of someone with an Outrider chassis. This is an alt mode that's meant to go in all terrain.
Yeah, like an off-road stuff.
Yeah, off-road vehicle. Like we mentioned, the Seeker. These are your jets. I think Windblade is a great example of an Autobot with the Seeker chassis. They do have a thing in there about how fast they can actually move. You don't get to move it like Mach 2 in combat because the amount of like spaces you could move in a single round is ridiculous. And so they do have some limitations on that. They have like a little blurb sort of talking about it.
It's also kind of silly to assume that if you're screaming past someone at Mach 2 that you're going to be able to hit anything.
Right. I sort of see it as that like if a GM wanted and like if they needed to get someone to like bring a message or like go somewhere really quickly, I would say there's room to allow a Seeker like transformer to gain a lot of speed in sort of narrative time. But then when you're going down to combat time, then we have to sort of impose some mechanics for the sake of everyone's sanity. And then the last one is support. This one is pretty flexible, where you could be a construction vehicle or an ambulance or like a fire truck. There's some like overlap with it and the monolith, I think, in terms of like some of the vehicles that qualify.
It was kind of interesting when you mentioned that the lookout you felt was a good kind of catch-all. I kind of feel like this is the catch-all kind of
interesting
origin.
So this one, I guess I would disagree with you on that, because this one, in terms of the way it's described, I can just read the little blurb here real quick. Like the structures you're named after, supports prop others up. Though you don't tend to participate in fighting actively, you brave the thick of battle in the name of helping your allies. That said, like any Cybertronian since the war broke out, you typically carry a weapon at all times and know how to use it. You're likely to choose alt modes that let you assist humans in emergencies between missions, like ambulances, rescue helicopters, fire trucks, and bulldozers. So that's why I sort of see them as those, whereas the lookout can maybe be like a smaller vehicle.
See, when I think of it, though, I think of like the lookout as like, the motorcycles, the little tiny unobtrusive cars, or like the, very, very spy.
Yeah, for sure.
Spy focused kind of thing. Whereas support feels like, all right, it's like almost anything else, because, you're lumping in rescue helicopters and bulldozers kind of in the same thing. So
yeah.
It's kind of got that Hufflepuff feel to it.
I think that works for sure. And each of these, we're not going to get into super high detail, but each of these provide various benefits that I think do a good job of sort of fleshing out what you might want an origin to do. My gut reaction when I saw them was that, gosh, I wish these things did more like in combat, to like allow me to use them in certain ways. And it's not that you can't use them in combat. I think with like, once you have like weapons that you have like maybe like sticking out of a vehicle, you have a lot of flexibility in that way. But I think upon rewatching some of the cartoons recently, the thing that I noticed with this thought in mind is that the Autobots are using their alternate modes mostly to get from point A to point B, and if they need like a burst of speed. But in combat, at least in terms of cartoons and that sort of thing, once a fight breaks out, they're mostly in bot mode, getting to cover, shooting at their enemies, trying to gain their objectives. But they're not like transforming as quickly from moment to moment once combat begins.
Clearly, you have listened to Empire of Rust then.
Well, I'm catching through. It's quite a backlog, and it's all a lot of like really fun stuff. But I would say that like I think some people might see these origins and be like, "That's all that they do." They grant me like a fly speed and like one, some essence score bonuses and like some other like flyby or like ramming attack. Like they don't provide anything else. And I will say that you can add something if you want, but I think something that we found was that in combat, you are likely to find situations where they're very useful that don't necessarily equate to some sort of like active combat ability, like special attacks. That you'll use them for transporting innocent civilians who might be in danger, or using a built-in weapon that, maybe sticks out of the hood, and now you can shoot, but now you have the benefit of the extra speed and mobility of your vehicle mode with some shooting. There are some penalties that apply for moving too fast while using a weapon, but, all of these things are present, whether it's like getting to like a higher vantage point or, busting through a wall, like if you're like want to go to ramming speed as like a big truck. Those sort of happen, and then you're going to have so many other perks from your role or class that I think it works out in the end. But that's sort of my general thought process, was that while they may not look like they do a lot on their surface, I think they service what we should expect from Transformers.
Let's go ahead and move on to the next section, the roles.
Yes, the roles. This is sort of like the big part. I think this is the thing that people get really excited about outside of the origins, which is sort of like the very exciting as a Transformer, but like what you do in moment to moment stuff. This is the big one. So yes, these are like your character classes. This is going to be basically what determines what your role as an Autobot is. Some of them I feel like fit within our understanding of generally of like RPG archetypes, but some of them are definitely much more unique. They don't fit into one of those things when we think about like the tank, like a fighter, or like a wizard, or like the healer, and stuff like that. Some of them do. Others are a little bit more oddball when it comes to fitting into those scenarios or those classifications, I should say, which I think is really interesting.
I've actually found that it has a lot more in common with sci-fi themed settings than it does with fantasy ones.
I guess that makes sense.
For example, like the scientists and analysts and stuff like that, like that really does kind of focus more on like the intelligent kind of like skill heavy characters that you'll find in sci-fi. You have scouts, you have warriors, you know, these kind of like are very like defined archetypes, both in fantasy and in sci-fi. The one that is very unique, and I wish there was actually a few more of things like this, is the Mode Master.
Yeah, Mode Master is very cool.
That's certainly one of the most unique and kind of interesting ones from this rule set. Partly because it is so Transformers specific. So Mode Master allows you to do like become either a triple changer, or it allows you to be a, what was the other focus there, Brandon?
Yeah, it's micro-linked.
Micro-linked.
So whether you want to be a triple changer or micro-linked, where you basically have like mini-con companions, think about like Soundwave with Ravage and like Rumble. If you have someone like Sound Blaster and his various cassettes that shoot out, the idea of,
you mean Blaster?
Blaster, yeah, sorry. The idea of being a Transformer with these like little mini Transformers that you can deploy for various specialized things is so fun. The other part that's fun is sort of thinking about like how they integrate with your alt mode. Like I've spent many an hour sitting there thinking about like, if I wanted to be this alt mode, but I wanted to be micro-link Mode Master, like what would the alt mode of my mini-cons be? You know, obviously we're in an era where cassette tapes are not quite as prevalent. And so thinking about some of these things, I think it gives an example.
You take that back.
I think it gives an example, like if you wanted to be like a food truck and you're like, one of your like micro guys could be like a deep fryer. That was sort of like you could have inside the food truck, which is a weird one, but it could totally work.
That's amazing.
But it also mentions that they could be something like they could transform into basically like maybe like some shoulder plates or like a helmet or like a breastplate sort of thing. I think of Soundwave in Transformers Prime. His laser beak didn't turn into a cassette, but basically turned into like a breastplate attachment for him. So it doesn't have to turn into a full thing that's like a disguise that then gets integrated into your alt mode or bot mode. It can be something like, you know, a gauntlet attachment or breastplate, shoulder plate, helmet, that sort of thing. So there's some flexibility there.
Rex in Empire of Rust did that with his little buddies, where they turned into
the herd,
the plates on his Stegosaurus back.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the sort of thing that these have. So, you know, each of these roles, they have things called focus, which are basically something like a specialization that you can sort of go into, and each one has two, which is nice. And I have basically like found that there's one that's usually more like utility and skill focused, and the other one might have more of a combat application. That doesn't necessarily apply for all of them. An example could be the Gunner. This is a class that focuses entirely on using firearms to the best of their ability. This is like your combat focused character. And this one has two different combat focused focuses. One of them is the gunslinger and the other one is the sharpshooter. And so these are focuses that don't really change what the gunner wants to do, but more how they want to do it and what weapons they want to use. Whereas the gunslinger wants to use a variety of different types of weapon, like guns, and maybe even be dual wielding them. The sharpshooter is really focused on that long range precision use of their firearm. And then you have ones that are a little bit more different from each other, like the scientist. You can be a medical officer. The example I think of is Ratchet, or you can be a gadgeteer, which just comes down to like inventing new pieces of equipment for you and your team. And I think of like Wheeljack. So those are two kind of more different ones. And the last example I'll give is the Scout, which you have the Prowler, which is I sort of see as more of sort of like the assassin-y rogue version of the Scout, where you get some more abilities to get the jump on your opponents in combat. And then the somewhat confusedly named Outrider, which is the name of an origin in a previous section of the book, which has more of the mobility options, which are very useful in combat, but don't necessarily translate to more damage.
Now, one thing that I'll add to this is, and this is a potential concern as well, and this actually kind of like I think it reinforces the point you had made earlier on here, Brandon. Whereas you really should be talking with everyone you're playing with and have a very different and very unique focus for each person. The reason for that is because your roles here are fairly static. There's not a ton of choice options throughout the entire throughout your level progression. So anyone who picks Warrior, for example, is going to get a lot of the same benefits as someone else who picks Warrior. So and while you do have the two focus options, you can split off a little bit. You are still going to overlap quite a bit if two people pick the same role. Whereas unlike other game systems where there's a lot of different like options you have between each level, that's a bit stripped down, a bit limited in this system. So picking different roles for each player is definitely a good idea. Just because you're going to effectively find that you're duplicating a lot of abilities and kind of stepping on each other's toes a little bit as you go through your session.
Yeah, I would say that for those looking into this system, I think a great deal of the customization for your character comes during the character creation. As, like Michael said, many of the perks that you gain are set by your role. You'll get some unique ones for your focus, but things like increasing your essences, that's preset in your role. For anyone who has the book, whether in PDF or physical form, you'll notice that on each role's first page, there's a table there that lays out what perks you'll gain at certain levels, but will also tell you at what levels you'll gain bonuses to your various essence scores. And those are set out in stone. And so it's good to take a look at those ahead of time so you'll have a good idea of what your character is going to be good at. Each one usually has like one primary and then a secondary one. And then the other two essence scores, you don't gain as many bonuses in. So it's good to take a look at those. You do gain some customization where at certain levels, players can select general perks from a separate chapter. But those are a little bit, they're not going to get so many of them. They sort of come at the same cadence as ability score increases or options for feats and something like D&D 5th edition. So they are a small way to customize, but you don't get as many divergent customization paths as you're leveling up. So really take the time, I think, during character creation to sort of like plan out and see how things are going to go for your various combination of origin, role, and influence.
You think it's time to actually run through the creation process?
Gosh, it really does feel like it, doesn't it? So the book does outline basically some steps for character creation. We're not going to get into the super nitty gritty here as we've sort of like gone into the various steps and sort of talked about some of the details there. But we will sort of like go through in general steps for what the book suggests for the stages of character creation. We have some personal thoughts on how to maybe customize it, but we'll start with what the book says. So step 1 for character creation, or I guess we should actually go back further. There's a step 0 described in the book, which is important, is discuss with your GM and other players. This is sort of what we were talking about in terms of making these characters in a group. I definitely think this is a valuable step to sort of sit together and brainstorm ideas for characters, like what kind of like role you want to play within the group, and also for the GM to tell you basically an idea of what you can expect in your missions together as Autobots. And
also provide an opportunity for players to help define what the GM is going to do. If all the players want to have a boat alt mode or something like that, then the
Right.
GM is going to have to really start to think about like, hey, maybe I need to set this on a water world rather than a desert. So
Yeah. Or if you're playing in a campaign like Empire of Rust, it would be good for the group to know that maybe intrigue and, espionage and, a lot of like social skills will be definitely definitely important. Obviously plenty of room for combat. Carapace has plenty to do in Empire of Rust. But you also have to have Sweet Spot there as well. But players will definitely probably want to know what the GM has in mind. And the GM is probably going to want to know what they're interested in so that everyone has fun at the table. So I think step 0, discuss with your GM and other players so that everyone's on the same page, I think will be a great first step regardless of game.
The next one, the official step 1, is come up with your character concept. Now, this is going to be kind of like go back and forth between like how you play a character, how you build a character. I know several folks who are more mechanical about how they build characters, so they'll come up with the numbers first. But I know plenty of other people who are going to come up with the character concept first, the character idea first. Do you want to be this like super beefy warrior? Do you want to be this super intelligent scientist? What is going to appeal to you? So that's kind of where you are at this step. Once everyone has kind of come to the idea of, hey, this is going to be the overall theme of the campaign. Now you're choosing the theme of your character and what your character is going to focus on and, well, not focus on, but what your character's goals and roles and ideals are going to be for the campaign. Now, if you want to play that, super intelligent character, this is the perfect opportunity. And this does kind of go back to step 0 a little bit too, where you really do need to figure out, hey, should I be playing this like super intelligent character? Is this what the party is going to need? Is this going to be useful? So it might actually be a good idea that if you're coming to your first session, it might be a good idea to come with like 2 or 3 different character ideas or character concepts, all of which you might enjoy playing. That way, if the team is going to need some shifting, you have that option. You have that ability to be able to kind of like pick and choose what is going to, 1, be fun for you, and 2, going to fit in well with the group.
Oh, absolutely. I think having multiple character concepts when you come to the table for for step 0 to discuss this with the other players is going to ensure that everyone is going to be able to play something that they're excited about. And that's really what, the key to this is finding something that you're excited about and using that as, sort of like your anchor as you're going through character creation process. And having a solid character concept should make it easier because if you're like looking through the influences, you'll probably see one that's like, oh, that's perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And then you don't have to worry about knowing what they all do because you found the one that sort of aligns with your character concept. So I think it's a really important step. Once you have established your character concept, the second step in the book is essence score increases and skill point investment. This is a major part of character creation because skill point investment is like the engine that makes your character work. So, like we mentioned, there are 4 essence scores: strength, speed, smarts, and social. At the beginning of character creation, you're going to gain 12 essence points to spend between your 4 essence scores. You'll also gain an essence point from your origin later during character creation, and 3 more essence score increases from your role at first level. So good to keep that in mind. Once you're done, you'll have a total of 16 essence points set into your character. There are 2 things that you need to keep in mind when putting in these essence scores. You need 1 point in each essence score. You can't have like a 0.
I can't have a 0
any of them because
what if I want to have a 0 social?
0 social. You just like. Like you can't communicate, you don't speak.
I just walk into a room and just fart.
Yeah, that's the extent of your socialization. The other thing to keep in mind is that you can't increase an essence score above 15, and that includes the additional bonuses from origins and your role. I will say you don't have to worry about it because mathematically you can't get your score above a 15 with these because 1 has to be in each of them, so you can't get up there. And also as you level up, these are going to increase. And looking through the enemies in the back of the book, there's only one character that I found in the back of the book that has an essence score above 15, and that's Megatron. And he's allowed to do that because he's the greatest gladiator in
as you do.
As he is wont to do.
Now, it's important clarification that 15, that cap is a cap for the entire game from levels 1 through 20. So you cannot increase an essence score above 15 for the entirety of the campaign, unless unless you and your GM are talking, or your GM has decided that you want to be a more higher level, higher power campaign, and they allows the players to do that. But typically, 15 is the absolute cap for any essence scores at any point in the game.
Yeah, sort of think of it as like getting a stat to like 20 in 5th edition D&D. Like that is sort of like the built-in mortal limit. And obviously in D&D, there are magical ways to increase your stats above that. But 15 is the max for your standard Autobot hero in this game. But if you have an essence score at 15, you are very good at that. Like that's very high. But you will likely not end up starting there. At the characters that I made, I think for those who are really specializing in their various skills, I believe the highest single essence score that I had was 8. Wallop had a strength of 8, and Eclipse, the scout, had a speed of 8. And they were very good at the skills within those things. But that sort of gives you, I think, a good idea of where to start. Like, you know, like if I really want to be really good at this one thing, what should my essence score be? I would say somewhere between 6 and 8 would be a good starting essence score for whatever your primary thing is. If you want to be a warrior,
sure thing,
and use an Energon axe like Optimus Prime, you're probably going to want a high strength essence at level 1. And I would say starting somewhere between 6 and 8 would be a really good starting point based on your preference.
Really good values to have there. Excellent.
Yeah. And then so the other point for this step is the skill point investment. Every time you invest a point into an essence, you can then invest into a new skill within that essence, or choose a specialization within one of the skills. So, for example, if you
a third option is to train up that skill to actually start off the whole process with it.
Yes. Yeah. So that includes starting one. So let's say I'm making a character and I have no points into something like initiative, which is its own skill under speed. If I don't end up investing anything into initiative, I'll be rolling a snag every time I roll initiative. So let's say you don't want to do that. So let's say I was making Eclipse, the motorcycle alt mode scout ninja character. As I'm going through character creation, I have, let's say I've invested 3 points into his speed thus far, and I want to invest a 4th one. And I'm looking through his skills, and one of them is initiative, and I realize I have nothing in I have no ranks in that. I'm going to increase his speed to 4 and then use that to gain his first rank in initiative. So now I at least roll a die for that. And you're going to do that every time you increase an essence. You're going to either choose a skill to get a rank in, or increase that rank, or gain a specialization, which, like we mentioned before, allows you to roll up to all of the dice you have within its associated skill.
Now, a little bit of clarification with that. The essence score increases that you get from your origin and your roll, you do get skill increases with those, but they are oftentimes limited to the types of skills you can choose. So while speed has, infiltration, driving, initiative, and acrobatics, I believe, if I recall correctly. Mm-hmm. Some rolls, even though it gives you an increase to your speed essence, doesn't necessarily allow you to take a bonus or a skill in initiative. Just say it might only give you the option to give it to like infiltration, and that's because like the role or the origin is specifically slated to go in a particular way.
Yeah,
this does not apply to the ones that the essence score increases that you get at character creation, like the 12 points that you have to spend, nor does it apply to the extra essences that you get after level 1. The ones you get at level 1 are generally limited to what you can get, and the increases that you get from your focus are also limited as to what you're going to get. But the bonus ones that you're going to get as you go from levels 2 through 10, not linked to focus, of course, are available to whichever skills that you want from that particular essence. It's a really like nitty gritty kind of like finicky rule, but it is something that you need to keep in mind as you're building the character.
Yeah, and I know for those listening and watching this, we are sort of using a lot of terms, and if you're not following along in the book, it can be sort of tricky. I will say that of the steps, I think this is probably the trickiest one. Yes. Just because it requires a bit of forethought, where you have to sort of be thinking about where you want to invest these. I think that's something I found when I was making characters, that I was super worried that I wasn't going to have enough ranks in various types of skills. Things like alertness for things like looking around and perceiving things. Things like infiltration to be able to stealth, or targeting to be able to use my blaster. And like then all the other things. I was really worried about that, which I think is why it's good to do this with the group, so that everyone can sort of be aware. It's like, hey, I have a really high alertness. I can sort of be sort of like, you know, the one who sees danger. Then you sort of be like, okay, well, maybe just one rank in that is fine, or maybe none, so that you can feel like you invest your skills and get those up to where you want to be. And it's also possible that you do this and you sort of look at it and be like, no, I need to reinvest some of these and sort of shuffle some things around. Don't feel like that once you like fill in that bubble or write it on your character sheet that it's done forever. Yeah, so that is step 2, essence score increases and skill point investment. Definitely one of the more complex ones.
Before we go on, though, I think there's one more thing that we need to add. There's 4 skills in the game that are a bit more important than others, I think. Might, targeting, initiative, and conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
Might and targeting are your physical and your melee physical and your ranged attacks. So might is when you're trying to hit something, and targeting is when you're trying to shoot at something. Since all of your skills are based off of the essence score increases you have, these right here, like these, there's no separate attack roll kind of thing. There's no separate attack stat that you can choose. It's all part of it all comes from your essences.
Yeah. And there are some exceptions, like finesse can be useful for like bow-like weapons, or something like if you wanted to use there are certain weapons like light blades, which I believe can be categorized under finesse, which you use that bonus for. The scientists could potentially use their technology test for using some of their weapons if it meets certain requirements. So there are exceptions, but I would say Mike is 100% correct, where that, you know, based on the kinds of weapons you want to use, you should really focus in on might and targeting. Initiative, obviously, for that. And then conditioning is how you're going to increase your health. It does not go up unless you're investing into conditioning.
Absolutely. All right. So moving on to step 3. This is probably going to be the easiest one out of all the character creation. Picking your influence. And I say the easiest because, again, your influence generally doesn't have that much of a mechanical impact on your character. Mechanical again?
You did it again.
So your influence, again, is you get a somewhat small to medium impact perk at level 1. And then you also get to choose either hang-ups if you are picking more than one, and you can pick some bonds to kind of give yourself some more story, some more backstory to your character. But influences are probably the easiest ones that we can go through.
Yeah, you'll gain that one perk unless you take multiple influences, in which case you'll gain a couple. But there'll also be some hang-ups with those extra ones. But other than that, it's a pretty straightforward step. And if you have a good character concept, shouldn't be too hard to pick out some. Let's see. After step 3, we've got step 4, which is selecting an origin. If you're sitting down to play Transformers, you have probably already thought about what vehicle you want to pick from. And we've already talked about them. But this will be important, you know.
But Brandon, what if I didn't pick one already?
Well, if you hadn't picked one, then you're going to want to go through and sort of think about how it might interact with your role. I think this is one of the coolest parts about character creation, is the the way that the combination between your chassis and your role will sort of interact with each other. The idea of the benefits you gain out of being a support origin scientist medical officer is that if you want to go with like an ambulance, then you're going to be super useful for having that extra support equipment that the support origin gets, as well as being able to be a medic, not just for Autobots, but also maybe for humans. Or if you wanted to be, in the same example of medical officer scientist, being a monolith class means that you're going to be super survivable, so that no matter how bad a combat encounter might be going, you'll probably be tanky enough to stay in the fight to keep the rest of your allies up. Or if you want to be a champion class, a champion chassis origin, like Wheeljack, then you're going to be super fast and you're going to be able to beeline it your way across the battlefield to get to your allies quickly, to provide that medical aid where it's needed. So even with just that one example of a role, the choice of origin really does alter how your character is going to be moving from place to place and how they interact with different scenarios.
Something else that you get with your origin that we didn't talk about before was your starting health. The amount of health you have. It gives you your speeds both in bot mode and your alt mode, along with your size as well. So the origin, it really kind of provides like the base look of your character.
Yeah. And like we mentioned before, this is probably the closest thing to something like choosing your species or race in another game. So yeah, it'll increase an essence score. You'll get your starting health and size. And then also an origin skill. They're usually pretty small and flavorful, but some of them can be pretty impactful. So take a look at those. But I would say for picking your origin for Transformers, pick the one you think is cool. Like if you've always dreamed about your own Transformers character and you just thought that like Optimus Prime is just the coolest Transformer, then pick Monolith and just follow your heart, man. Like, it's going to be super fun. And I think no matter what role you end up playing, you're going to find cool combinations for any of these. So take a look and see what they offer, but I think all of them are super fun.
And last, well, actually not last, there's still like one more step after this, but the last of like the big choices you have to make is, of course, your role or your class. So yeah, we're not going to go through all the roles again, but this is where you are going to grab the role you have chosen, along with increasing your essence score to, I believe it's 2 different essence scores that you get at the level 1. You get a bunch of abilities linked to your role at level 1. I want to say you get like 4 or 5 different abilities based on the role you chose. And there's also a couple of static abilities that all characters get. They get an ability called For the Allspark, which gives a 3 or 4 different like little bonuses, upshifts to infiltration tests, the ability to effectively transform, equipment, and immunity to carbon-based diseases. And the reason for that is because since the Essence 20 system is kind of global to all of Renegade's properties, you know, both Power Rangers and G.I. Joe, they did have to specify that, hey, you're not affected by human-based toxins. Like, okay, cool, that's fine.
Yeah.
They mentioned it because one of the books that actually just came out recently was the Field Guide to Action and Adventure, I believe. And it's the big crossover book from Renegade. So they provide a lot of rules to have Transformers characters in the G.I. Joe missions and Power Rangers characters in like Transformers. And there's a lot of like overlap and interplay now. So
the kind of missions you could do with that is so wild to me. Like the idea that we live in a gaming era where we can do that and there's like official support for it. It's super exciting.
Yep.
But yeah, so you get a whole bunch at the beginning for when you choose your role. You're just going to go through and get those. Something else to mention is that you're going to get training. This comes in with your essence scores, where it will also tell you okay, this is the essence bonuses you gain, and then these are the skills that you can choose to increase with that bonus, as well as equipment training. Each role will sort of specify what weapons and armor sort of gear that your character is trained in, which is helpful for gear acquisition before a mission. We're not going to get into it. That's a whole different kettle of fish. But just so you're aware, this is where that sort of information, which is basically like weapon proficiencies in other games, that's going to be defined by your role. And then something else I figured we'd mention very briefly is that during your selection of your role, you're finalizing your skills at this point, where you're getting your final bonuses to your essences and your final bonuses to skills. And then this is where you're going to determine your defenses. Each essence has a defense associated with it, which will come up during combat, or even potentially not during combat, during exploration or even social encounters. And these are going to be 10 plus your essence score, plus any additional bonus from perks and any additional bonuses from various armor you might be wearing. The defenses are toughness, which is associated with your strength, evasion, which is associated with your speed, willpower, which is associated with your smarts, and cleverness, which is associated with your social essence.
Pretty simple addition. 10 plus essence plus perks plus any armor you got.
Yeah. But it's important to note that you do have those 4 separate defenses, and they will come up. I will say, overall, most often, evasion will be the defense that you end up using during most scenarios. Toughness, probably second after that. Willpower, third. Cleverness is probably going to come up the least often. So in combat, those who have invested heavily into smarts and social, their defenses may not be as high. So they may have to be more careful about their positioning. But those defenses, when they do come up, I think will be super impactful. Willpower, I think, is often used for, like, in the book describes for like sonic attacks. And cleverness is kind of can be used as a defense during like a social encounter, where if you're dealing with someone and they like make a jab at you in like front of someone, and you might like take a hit to your social status, it wouldn't necessarily be a contested like roll as much as they're rolling against your cleverness defense. And if they can't beat it, it sort of means that you're able to get back at them and sort of like, exchange another sort of verbal barb with them, so to speak.
Love it.
Yeah, some really cool potential for mechanical interaction there. The next step described by the book is step 6, which is describe your character. This one, I feel, sort of like comes naturally as you're sort of like making a character. You think about what they look like. So, this is the time to sort of think about between the combination of your origin, your influence, your role. What does your Autobot look like? And, feel free to use the essence system with the scores to sort of think about what your character looks like. If they're strong, then they might be like very like big and, bulky and, rugged looking. Or if they have a low strength, maybe they're like skinny and maybe a little bit more delicate and fragile. If they have like, a low social skill, maybe they're sort of like dull or anxious or shy or something like that. And that's something that you can work with. Versus someone with a high social skill, who may be very elegant, very friendly, very, diplomatic in all the way that they speak. There are a lot of different things that you can do with that. And thinking about your gear, we're not going to get too much of it into it in this episode, but, your Autobot has certain external and internal hard points for holding onto their gear. And if you have any of them that are on your internal hard points, it means that you basically have this piece of equipment integrated into your body. The example I always think of is, I believe it's Prowl's sort of like little gun things on his shoulders in his bot mode, which I think maybe shoot like a foam or something, if I remember correctly. It's weird.
Depends on the episode you're watching.
Yeah, it depends on the series. And stuff like that. So, it's a good place to sort of think about, where the various parts of your alt mode appear on your bot mode. There's a lot of, like, Hot Rod has, like, the exhaust pipes for his vehicle mode sort of on his arms, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
And I think he can even use them as blasters. So, like, that sort of kind of stuff, that's definitely where that comes in on this step.
And the last step, again, another flavor one, is form a team. And this is kind of figuring out how all of your characters are going to be interacting with each of the other characters. How do you know the other players? Or I should say, how does your character know the other players' characters? Are there any rivalries? Are there any friendships? Did, one of your teammates kind of save your life before the start of the adventures? you kind of figure out how you're going to be reacting to the other players' characters to help inform and just to get a better gaming session.
Yeah. This one, I think, sort of pairs well with like the step 0, where it's like work together to sort of figure out like how best these characters are going to mesh, not just mechanically, but flavor wise as well.
Yep. And kind of one last thing is, even though when you start off your character, it's generally going to be at level 1. Brendan, when you started us off, I believe you started us at level 5, if I recall correctly.
Not level 5, but I did put you guys to level 2.
2. Okay, 2 is not even close to 5.
Yeah. Yeah, I bumped you guys to level 2 just so that you guys could each gain a new perk from your focus, so that each of you guys would feel like you had unique abilities that you guys could use. But yeah, so if you're starting at a higher level, there is a little blurb in here that talks about like, it's basically you just level up your character to that appropriate level.
Just go through the role listing and take a look at what you get each level, and that's what you get. So simple enough to do. There's no other things that you are going to be adding over the course of like leveling up aside from what your role provides. So in that respect, the system is very clean in that way. Unlike things like D&D or Pathfinder, where in addition to all the stuff you get from your class, you also get feats every couple of levels. You'll get ability score increases every couple of levels. And it's just a little bit opaque as to when that's going to be coming up. With this system, everything that you get for each level is clearly spelled out in the role chart, so you know exactly what you're getting.
Yeah. With the one exception of general perks, which you get just a small handful of as you're going through, and then you can pick from a chapter with these general perks in there, which can be a nice way to make your character a little bit more distinct, but they are a small part of character progression.
But even then, that's listed right up on the role chart.
Yeah,
for each level.
It'll tell you when you can pick a general perk, so you'll know when it's coming.
All right, well, that was a lot of stuff there. Brandon, let me just get your kind of final thoughts as to the system here. We don't need to get into too much detail, but just kind of give me your overall feelings for it before we wrap this up.
Yeah, I think I like this system a lot. There's a lot of room for using, there are various mechanics that allow players to sort of invent little bonuses for themselves, like using narrative storytelling mechanics. I think that character creation in this is super dense, but once you sort of get your head around it, you can really curate a unique Autobot to go on these adventures and missions for. So I think there's a lot of fun there. I would say that like after making like 4 characters for this system, I might suggest for someone, if they're making a character and they're maybe more mechanics minded, to maybe pick their origin and roll first, get those initial essence bonuses that are going to be set in stone first, so they can sort of see where they're starting, and then apply the other 12 so you can have like a more fine-tuned idea. I found before I was investing a lot into ones that I thought I was going to need, and then I was getting extra from the ones that I, was going to get from my origin and from my role. And so then I felt like, I haven't invested enough in these other things now. And now this has plenty. And now I feel like I'm deficient in some of these roles. So, I think that would be as a tip for anyone creating a character who really wants to have a fine-tuned character with the stuff that they want to do without investing too heavily into one area. Maybe do it origin, role, and then the essence point, assigning those other 12 essence points. It could be useful. It was helpful for me to get a better idea, making sure I was balanced enough while still having a distinct specialization for each of the characters that we used in that adventure.
I think that gets back to the entire idea of whether you're a more technically minded player who is building it with mechanics first. Mechanics, again, 4th time.
You're incorrigible.
And between them and people who are definitive role players and definitive character players first, whereas they're going to pick how the character is going to, they'll pick the numbers based on how the character forms in their head, versus the technical people who are going to build the numbers out first and then fit the role to that. I know I definitely fall into the latter category on that.
Yeah.
but yeah, it's And I'll echo what you said. The character creation can be dense, and it will kind of take you a little while to get through it, and to make certain that you're getting all of your skill points, your skill upgrades in the right spot, in the right order, because I think that's the toughest part of it. But it's a very unique system, and I do like how all of the skills are based off of those attributes that you have, and there aren't any dead attributes, which is something that does come up sometimes in D20 systems like 5th edition and Pathfinder, where you're going to have a dump stat because you have no need for it, and it doesn't feed into any of the skills that you want to use. Whereas on this, it is complete. Since it's stripped down so much, each essence is very clear and very defined and very useful. You're going to be rolling on them all the time.
Yeah, I definitely think it's one where, since it is more like, packed in, each essence is going to have a skill that you will probably want some level of investment in, at least one. And, you have to have 1 point in there anyway. But I think that you're going to want to look at those and just sort of see where they are. But I think then also the benefit of it is that, since I think if you follow that first step, and our also tip for making these as a group, these characters as a group. So you think about, like, what is our team dynamic? You think about iconic teams in various animated series or movies, the A-Team, where, like, I think of characters like shows like, you think about Transformers Prime, each character within Optimus's team, they have their defined skills and roles, and also weaknesses that other people have. Like, Bulkhead is obviously like one of the tougher. His conditioning stat is going to be super high, but his smart skill is not going to be nearly as high as someone like Ratchet or even RC, who might be a little bit more perceptive. And even that, right? Like the allocation of your skill ranks within an attribute is going to make your character stand apart. Whereas Ratchet is going to have a high smarts, but maybe have his set into stuff like technology and science. Someone like RC might have it more in alertness. Same with like Bumblebee. And so, but what makes like this nice holistic thing where, in a system like this, I think players will find is that you're going to rely on your fellow players a lot more. Because you can't do everything. Whereas in like D&D, unless you have a lot of really low ability scores, you're probably going to be rolling with some sort of bonus on any given check, right? Like, you might have 1 or 2 stats where you have like a -1 or a -2 maybe. But like, it's the D20 and then plus whatever your base score is, even if you don't have an investment in a skill, right? Like in D&D, if I'm not like, unless the Dungeon Master says that I can't roll for it because it requires a certain like skill proficiency. Like, if I want to try to climb a mountain, even if I don't have athletics, I can just roll a D20 and add my strength. In this system, by imposing a snag, if you don't have a rank in a skill, means that you are going to be less inclined to try something if you're not trained in it, which means you're going to rely on your teammates. So I think there's a big focus on teamwork in this system, which I think is really fun. And I think it's cool that it mechanically sort of pushes players in that direction. So it's a good thing to keep in mind.
Excellent. We are going to do probably 1 or 2 more of these videos at some point in the future, talking about equipment, because that is its own beast.
Yeah, it's a whole other thing.
And probably talking about things like energon points, story points, and kind of just like the flow of combat within a scene. So I think we'll end up doing that at some point in the near future.
Yeah, I will say one other tip for people making their characters: the character sheet, that like the free downloadable PDF, does not have enough room for all of your character perks. Have an extra sheet of paper or like an extra document to put those in. Just a little extra thing that I found is that little box. Not big enough.
Well, Brandon, thank you for joining me today. Is there anything that you want to plug, or anything you'd like to tell people about before we head out?
Oh, I think that, keep an eye out for the upcoming episodes of Empire of Rust. I think it's a great RPG. I enjoy listening to it, especially when I'm like hankering for a Transformers fix. But other than that, stay tuned to more transmissions. I am sort of a fledgling fledgling voiceover artist, voice actor, looking mostly just doing small projects here and there as a hobby, but really getting into it. So keep an eye out. I'm going to be setting up a Fiverr account, but not something I can really plug yet. But maybe in the coming weeks, I'll have something more definitive to send people towards.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for joining me today. And thanks for joining us as we talked about the Transformers RPG. It's been a long time coming. And we will see you next time.
All right. Thanks, Mike. And thank you, everyone.
Bye, y'all.